Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a six-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. Hi everyone, it's Arundhati and I'm back with episode 117 of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I was originally going to take a week's break from podcasting, but I just finished sending out my new bite-sized newsletter, which I've been doing for the past couple of weeks. And you've heard me talk about it every week on the podcast in the last few episodes. So I just sent out the second one and I was so inspired to come here and just hit record. There is a segment in that newsletter where I ask you to drop your questions. And I got some really important questions, which I wanted to bring here on the podcast, just so you get an idea of what actually goes on in the newsletter. And if you have questions, or if you've had the same question but never really got an answer, I'm hoping this episode will give you that clarity. But before that, in 2023, at the start of 2023, I was talking about wanting to offer a lot more free workshops as part of our virtual education, because I believe a lot of these conversations that happen on the podcast, we can have them in a Zoom room, in a class, in trainings. So I am very excited to tell you that I have just released details of my first free virtual workshop. It's called 10 Ways to Enhance Your Yoga Class Today. And it's a free masterclass. It's happening on May 16th. And I would love for you to attend if you are looking to make more impact through your asana classes. You want to elevate what you're doing. You want to build a stronger rapport with your students, and you want to strengthen your students' bond with yoga and how they relate and understand and practice yoga. Then I highly encourage you to attend the May 16th workshop. It's beginner friendly, as in it's beginner yoga teacher friendly. It will work even if you are a very experienced asana teacher. And it's meant to be a conversation. And I would love for you to come and explore the 10 ways in which you can get your yoga classes to just be that much more. Okay. And you've heard me say this on the podcast before, we are in the world of communicating yoga, about building relationships, building rapport, and engaging the participant. So I'm hoping that you will come to this free masterclass. Again, it's on May 16th. Just go to the link in my show notes description on the podcast. You can find it on Instagram. You'll also find it in the newsletter. Okay. And make sure you sign up. I cannot wait to meet you virtually in that workshop. And yes, if you cannot attend live, the replay will be sent out later that day. But I highly encourage you to show up live. I know I interact with a few of you on Instagram and on email. It's always wonderful to actually put faces to your names. So that's happening on May 16th, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Make sure you mark your calendar, and I cannot wait to meet you there. Okay. Now let's get on with today's episode. So I had a few questions come up in the newsletter, and I'm going to be answering two of those questions in this episode. Okay, so the first question was submitted by Robin. Now, unfortunately, I don't have Robin's last name. So here's Robin's question. I've noticed students over the past few weeks and months of practicing with me, they have really progressed in their practice. And by that, I mean they look more stable, more spacious, more present in their asanas than they did before. I feel proud of their progress, and I'm looking for a way I hesitate to say compliment. So I guess I want to recognize and acknowledge this with them. But I'm struggling to find the right words or phrases, as I don't want to really ascribe to good or bad judgments in yoga. For example, if I were to say, wow, you can touch your toes now, and you couldn't before, well done. The implicit judgment there is not touching toes is bad, touching your toes is good, which isn't really true. Right now, I find myself saying, you look stronger in that shape, you look more spacious, etc. But wonder if there are some other ideas. So, my question is, how can I affirm their progress? I feel like there is value in recognizing their progress with them, but I'm so desperate to not assign a judgment on their physicality. I hope this makes sense. Thank you so much for your time. Well, Robin, this is a great question, and thank you for asking and giving us context as to what's happening in your classes. And firstly, congratulations for making your students progress. That's fantastic that you are able to notice it and feel it. So here's my 2 cents on this, okay? Don't overthink it, okay? If you notice a student has progressed, feel free to call it out. I usually offer these positive feedbacks, observations after class. Okay. Usually when the student is packing up and about to leave the studio, the front desk is right there on their way out near the exit door. So I just, as they are leaving, okay, I make it a point to say something if there's something I've noticed. I personally don't compliment students during a class. I feel like it's distracting to me and the others. And I also think it's partly my Indian upbringing versus the American upbringing, where compliments are given more often and more freely. In India, we weren't really complimented as much for learning something. So it doesn't come naturally to me, but I do it, and I do it sparingly, but I do it not during class, after class, okay, or before. Essentially, when it's an informal environment and not everybody's attention is focused on what I'm saying. Okay, so I think you are on the right track, but I can offer you some of the things I say and see if this works for you. Okay, sometimes I say things like, hey, I noticed that you are getting more flexible. Do you notice it? Or I say something like, hey, looks like those hamstrings have opened up from the past few weeks. Do you notice it? Okay. Sometimes I say things like, ooh, your Chaturanga Dandasana has gotten so much better in form. Do you notice it? Essentially, I always ask if they notice it. Okay. Because then I can make sure that it's not just a compliment, but I'm actually engaging them in conversation and asking if they notice the transformation. Okay. And honestly, a lot of times my students say no, they do not notice it. Okay. And sometimes they do. Sometimes I even ask them if they've been struggling with a pose from the past few classes that, hey, did it get easier today? Does it make more sense? It looked like you got in and out of that with more ease. But I always pause to say, do you notice it? Okay, so it's not just I said something and that's the end of it. I'm asking if they are present in it, because we notice things sometimes, but the students don't observe it. Okay, so long story short, I'm trying to say, don't box yourself in. Don't think of it as you are saying this is good, that is bad. No, you're being completely transparent and honest. So don't overthink it. Just be mindful as to when you affirm it. Like I said early on, during a class for me is personally distracting, and it puts one person, like we're highlighting one person over the group. So I usually do it discreetly, professionally, in the informal parts of class. Okay, and don't worry about seeing it as judging their physicality. I'm using your own words here. As long as you are sharing from a genuine, sincere, authentic place, I don't think you have anything to worry about. So I would say compliment away, just keep it in balance, do it at the right time, and see if you want to bring them into the conversation a little more and ask them if they are noticing, if they are feeling it, if they are engaging with what they're doing. And when you put them into this conversation, I feel like you'll feel like it's less about you and more about them. Okay, so Robin, I hope this helps. If you have any follow-up questions, just find me on Instagram, okay, and just send me a note there, and it's easier to answer any follow-up questions. You can also leave it in the newsletter, but if it's something I've just said on the podcast, just find me on Instagram for it. Okay. Our second question comes from Pooja, who says, who asks, how important is alignment in every pose? Do I have to verbally or physically adjust if the student looks uncomfortable? Now, Pooja, great question. Okay. I think alignment is such a huge topic in yoga. Okay. And I think it is a big topic for many valid reasons, but I also think that we have kind of missed the ball on alignment altogether. So I'm going to try and keep my answer a little narrow and keep it in the context of asana alignment, because that's what it looks like you're answering. Okay. Earlier this week, I dropped a Instagram post called How Important is Alignment in Asana? So I would highly recommend you go read that. I think that will add value to this conversation. But to answer this question, we need to basically look at a few different things. Okay, first we have to prioritize the needs and goals of the student. Okay, that's very important. And I want to call that out very clearly right at the start of answering this question. So the needs and the goals of the student have to be highlighted over the ideologies of a teacher. So often I meet yoga teachers, or rather talk to yoga teachers, who tend to teach their own ideologies and what they like in yoga and not really look at the student in front of them, right? You don't want to teach, for example, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra to somebody who has chronic back pain and they're coming to yoga to help relieve that back pain. Okay. So just always remember, because you've said your students look like, if they look uncomfortable, do I adjust them? Okay. So recognize the needs and goals of the student over the ideologies of a teacher. And I know that's a little irrelevant to your question right now, but I want to open with that. Okay. Now, alignment is important for the student. Okay. Now, is it the central theme of what we do in yoga? Absolutely not. But if someone who has no idea of what to do and they show up in your asana class and you're teaching them, then you should be able to have some basis of alignment that you teach consistently week on week. For example, if I say Adho-Mukha Svanasana, you should be able to have some fundamentals that you follow when you do downward facing dog. And that should be consistent every week. Okay. It's not possible to say, do whatever you like in downward facing dog, because the student doesn't really know what to do. Okay. So I would say that you need some fundamentals. Okay. So the asanas are done safely and effectively. Especially if somebody has an injury, they should be made aware of the modifications to prevent further damage. Okay. And you have to have a plan of execution for the poses that you intend to teach and follow up accordingly. Okay. The problem arises when yoga teachers are too dogmatic in their approach. Okay. Not allowing for change or growth as circumstances and as people change. Okay. Now, I believe this was kind of the trend a decade ago and maybe a little early on, where it had to be alignment was it. You had to do it in this way. If not, there was no place for you in that yoga class. And there are schools of yoga that are like this even till date. And then what happened is, because we operate in extremes in modern yoga, we swung to the other end of the spectrum where it became so much about accessibility that anything now sometimes goes in yoga classes, and it's a whole you do you approach to asana. Okay. So what I think we need to do is find the middle path. Okay. Where context is important, goals and needs of the student are looked at, skills of the teacher are worked on, and we aim to deliver what we are telling people we'll do. Okay, what are we telling people we'll do in asana class? We'll connect them to their bodies, we'll make them more body aware, we'll help them breathe more freely, we'll help them feel connected to their physical body, to their annamaya kosha. So then they can go deeper into other layers, other koshas in their body. Okay, so having some form of alignment is absolutely necessary. I wouldn't say you have to get hung up on it, but it's needed. A good foundation is necessary. Okay, a skilled yoga teacher can assess a student's abilities, adjust the asanas to suit their needs, provide modifications, and even variations to enhance one's practice. Okay, by doing so, you are making sure that the students receive the benefits of yoga and they connect deeply to their asana and deeper layers of yoga through asana. Okay, it's dependent on the teacher and their ability and interest to personalize their teachings, but it's absolutely possible. Now, having said that long-winded, I'm very passionate about how we teach alignment to students, as in how we bring people into the practice, okay, and make them feel at home in the practice, and hence this long-winded answer, Pooja. But Here's what I'll tell you. Do you have to verbally or physically adjust the student if the student looks uncomfortable? Okay. If a student looks uncomfortable, firstly know that if it's new, they might look a little uncomfortable. Now, that's a very broad sentiment, right? Uncomfortable. You have to recognize, is there effort? And is it good quality effort? Are they exerting? There is effort and there is exertion. Okay. So if it looks like it is good quality effort, you've offered props, you've offered modifications, you've offered stages of build-up of the asana, then I don't think it's necessary to adjust. As people get stronger, they will get better at it. If the student is just exerting and they're not ready for it, then offer more prop support, offer verbal adjustments. I'm not a fan of physical adjustments. I believe I spoke about this in a previous podcast. Please offer verbal adjustments as much as possible and show it on your body and ask the student to mimic the same. Okay. So in short, I would say yes, alignment is important, especially if the student is new to asana. Once they're a little more experienced, things change. But it is important. You cannot look the other way and say, do anything you want. So keep an eye on your fundamentals and always opt for verbal adjustments over physical adjustments. Okay. So that kind of wraps up the two questions I wanted to give you some insight into. As always, you can ask more questions by subscribing to our newsletter. We have a little button in there where you can submit your questions. There's no limit. You can submit 1, you can submit 10. I will do my best to get through all of these questions. Sometimes they'll come to you in the newsletter. And now, since the newsletter is new, I'm just popping in here on the podcast to answer these, as some of you have very similar questions. Okay? Now, remember, May 16th is the free workshop, 10 ways to elevate your yoga class today. I look forward to seeing you in the workshop. Make sure you go to the show notes and sign up. The link is right there. Until next week, take care. Enjoy your practice. Bye-bye.